Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast UX Design to Win in Business. My name is Nils, co-founder at Dinghy. We are a strategic design and development agency to help you develop your products, your digital products faster. And today I want to talk to you about a topic that is very recently again part of my life and that I think is a crucial point to get right when working on digital products or any product really. I have the feeling this is sort of a universal topic, but we'll keep it in the realm of digital product development today. And my question to you is, have you ever been part of a group where you feel the goal is clear, but everybody seems to be on a different page and it's just very sluggish to get going? If you feel this way sometimes, you're not alone. I think this is one of the hardest things, actually for humanity, I would say, but for all of us to get right, is to make the other person understand what you want. And so in the episode today, I want to discuss the topic a little bit and also give you two examples where we used, I would say, untraditional ways to improve communication between the teams. All right. So on the topic of communication, I think it's relatively clear to everyone that communication is key. Communication is complicated. We sort of all know that, right? Since we're little. People speak different languages, like literally English, Spanish, Chinese, like really different languages. But something that probably takes a little while to develop is the realization that these communication challenges also trickle down to much smaller and much more granular aspects of your work life. So if you're just a small group, then communication can be relatively simple if you click as a group because everybody can be in the know about everything. But that doesn't scale, obviously, for all of you leading a bigger organization. Anything beyond 20 people is probably already really hard to manage with when it comes to communication, right? You have individual teams, you have marketing and design and development and business development and customer success and all of those different teams. And every individual working in one of those teams uses a different type of language in their field. So customer success agents will use a slightly different vocabulary than the product managers in your organization. Or in fact, everyone in your organization will probably use another way of talking about the business than you will use. Like when you as the decision maker or the CEO of your company, if you speak about the goals that the organization has set out to reach for the next period, then you will probably use a different vocabulary than other people in your organization when they talk about their respective part that contributes to those company goals. And I think the fact that to get communication right it's this thing where we all think this is obvious, of course. Like we have to make this work. It's sort of clear to everyone. But then maybe because it is so universal or so it should be clear to everyone, it is actually something that we don't work on actively enough, I would say. So to address this problem, I think many things came and go during the last couple of years. So we all still work in Scrum and in sprints, and then there's retro meetings and refinement sessions and plannings, and there's OKR check-ins, and there's all these sorts of institutionalized meetings that I think do exist to address the issue that communication is hard and that it's hard to get everyone on the same page in your organization. But sometimes I think those generic measures don't really hold up to address the problem properly. So sometimes I think you need really specific solutions to specific problems. And that brings me to example number one that I want to speak about. Example number one is that I call this example beyond static designs. So the example that I'm going to present is on where the development team and the design team comes together to build one product. And I'm sure you experienced this issue before. The great gap, the great divide between UI designers and developers, app developers of any kind, web developers, iOS, Android developers. Like if you ever worked on a digital product in your organization, you know that this gap is one of the hardest to overcome. And so we were in the position to work for a customer very dear to us, our friends at SmartFit. They are working on the next version of their online sizing, bike sizing solution. And we were tasked with the UX concept, with the UI design, to make everything ready for development. And as always, and as all UI designers, we worked in fixed size designs. That is the way that UI design is being done since always. We are working in Figma. There's also Adobe XD, of course. There's other tools that people work in. I think Figma is a very popular example, so I'll just stick to that one. So the story goes that we went and did our discovery research. We started to build wireframes. The wireframes turned into UI designs, and we started to cover all of the different areas of the app where you would need an example as a developer. So all of the different buttons and input elements and progress bars, and how does it look on a smaller screen, and how does it look on a little bit bigger screen. But because you only have those specific screen sizes that you have in Figma, and they are sort of static, there's many flexible things that you can leverage in tools in Figma to be quicker, but the result of what you're going to deliver is always, you pick like the screen size of a phone or of a tablet or of a laptop or of a huge screen, but you always pick a screen size. And so we did all of that. We provided like all of the different elements, and we made a system and have like all of that sort of stuff that developers love. They started to get going, and the customer felt like the product of what they made was at like a 80%. Like 80% of what they like, of how they felt about the designs, and that there was like, you know, like this little, like the last icing on the cake was sort of missing, and they couldn't really lay their finger on why that was, and kept discussing with the developers about that they think the text should be this long or here, or moved elements around and did like tedious tiny feedback stuff that cost them, the product managers at the customer's organization, cost them a huge amount of time and nerves, until we realized that there's a communication gap, that the developers were not really in the position to make the judgment of here's the phone design and here's the tablet design, but what happens if there's like a big phone? Like how does the layout work in the middle? And the way that we overcame this was that we, as the designers in this project, we built not only the Figma designs on a static sized artboard, but we went into the browser. Like our ability to also know how web development works and how layout works put us in a position where we could go not to write production code for them, but to communicate how we envision the design to work in a fluid way. Like how does this work when you make your browser a little bit bigger and a little bit smaller, and what happens if you hit, you know, like Command Plus to make the text a little bit bigger or the text a little bit smaller, and how does all of this feel when you really touch the product, and to communicate this to the developers, but also to the stakeholders, to people like you, to know, like you can look at a picture and you probably feel good about it, but then it's often not the same as how you feel about the final result. And I think that is exactly in these missing 20%. So to improve communication, we didn't have more meetings, or we didn't write more specs, or we didn't write more tickets or more granular feedback, like with annotations on screenshots and stuff. But we took the designs and made them interactive. We made interactive demos for individual screens that were particularly complicated to talk about. And with this, it was absolutely astonishing to see how that unlocked the understanding of the different parties involved to each other. So all of a sudden, there was this artifact in the middle that everybody could touch. Like the decision makers could play with it and put it on weird screen sizes because they were wondering how the app will look on a huge Samsung Galaxy phone or whatever. And they could do all of that on their own and were not reliant on us as the designers to put the design on a bigger or smaller artboard or anything. The developers could do the same thing and can also see the code. Like they can go in and see the code that made this flexibility work, and they could just take the parts that they wanted to put in their production code. And this, to blur the lines between design and development, that was absolutely the key in this scenario, because fluid and responsive design was the key issue to address. And so to do that, to provide like an interactive demo in this case, was really helpful to all of the parties involved. And so my second example is from our current project, working with SumUp, where we're integrated into the team and we're helping make a UX concept which brings together a whole bunch of information from different platforms inside of the organization that had not been presented together before. And so like I can't say too many specific things, but imagine you're trying to build an app that pulls from all of your different systems like SAP, Pipedrive, Notion, Jira, Tableau, what have you, and enable like a specific group of people to work with this sort of information. And so this project involves so many different groups inside of the organization. And to draw a little learning from this example, I just want to illustrate quickly how we started out. And so we started out by us as the agency creating the UI designs for one specific but bigger feature, where the functionality of this, in fact, sort of existed in a different tool they had inside of the organization already, but had to be made mobile friendly and had to be made to look as if it was like to incorporate SumUp's corporate design. So it changed a little bit, but the base functionality actually existed already, and many people knew this workflow already. And still, we made the UI design and iterated on it, did user testing, and all of the while, we thought that people were, so product managers, developers, other stakeholders, they were kind of coming along on the ride based on just this clickable prototype and the designs. And then as soon as we wanted to move into development, we realized that nobody was on the same page. And to cut like a huge long story short, what we had to do, where we figured the UI design makes sense for everyone, and thus everybody knows what is going to be developed, we had to take a step back. After 5 different meetings where we talked through the UI design and tried to understand in flowcharts and all sorts of diagrams what the systems, like how the systems would have to be connected to make this workflow possible, we realized that we can't just jump in and start to only create the visual part. Like our part is always the user experience. So for us, the product is only a win when the user experience is great. But that doesn't mean that all of the development work that has to go in to provide the information for this very user-friendly feature is not super hard to make and is actually very hard to put together in the background. So we took a step back and kind of built the wireframes together. And that sounds super weird, of course, but we got key stakeholders from different groups into one meeting, and everyone it felt like a jam session, really. And I'm not saying this is the solution to any project starting, but in this case, we had Salesforce people in the room, we had web developers in the room, we had Go developers in the room, like back-end people, we had our designers, and we had decision makers or people who will decide if this feature is good to go out, all in one room. And everyone kind of got to put their questions on the table when they felt that they were being lost. So we started and made like very rough wireframes to illustrate the flow. And at any point where someone from the Salesforce team, for example, had a question of where this information would come from, how it would be passed into his system, they just stuck on a sticky note. And so in the end, we had this probably relatively messy looking mixture of a flow chart with Post-its on it, with people drawing circles and all of this sort of stuff. But because everybody was in the room and got to interact with the other group being responsible for another piece of the feature, everybody felt like they got their questions in. They got to say that this part was going to be hard, this part was going to be easy. And because this was the case, from then on, making the feature was starting to become a lot easier because all of the relevant groups had this moment together where they could build trust in the other parties participating in development. And I think apart from the hard facts of how a feature is supposed to work, or to define an API payload, or, like to have all of the hard facts in place, I think it's very important for people to feel heard, to have had the opportunity to voice their concerns, and to have the feeling of that their issues were going to be addressed, to come to a solution, because then this consensus in this group leads to a buy-in from all of the participants, because as soon as you have the feeling that your questions were answered, you are much more likely to commit to the process and thus bring the motivation to the table to help see this through all the way to the end, no matter how complicated it will be. And so with this, I really want to open your mind to thinking outside of the box when it comes to communication, and that possibly different scenarios require a different solution. But I really believe from our experience at Dinghy, from what we've seen through our startup phase and working with mid-sized companies of any industry really, that the problem is rarely the actual skill of people or the abilities to make something. But the real hard challenge is to get everyone on the same page, to make them work together and to have fun doing it. And to do this, you need to address all of the soft factors in communication, that people feel safe, that people feel that they can express what they are thinking about, that they get a chance to be creative, and that all of this will lead to a fruitful product coming out of this. So to get into improving communication, I will speak a lot more about this topic on this podcast. And as I said last episode, I have a couple really great guests coming up from different backgrounds, and I'm looking forward to sharing all of those episodes as well. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one. Bye.